There are so many books out there to do with ministry, but there's only a select few that I believe really revolutionize how we do ministry. Today I'll be talking about one of those books, so stay tuned. Hey guys, how you doing? My name is Luke and I'm from NextGen Hub, where our passion is to empower, encourage and equip you, the next gen leader in your ministry. Now, as I said in my intro, there are some books out there that really revolutionize how we do ministry. So I'll be talking about this one today, Caught in Between, and that is engaging your preteens before they check out. Now, this book here is written by Dan Scott. So Dan is a guy who works with the Orange Group over there in the United States, in Atlanta. And I actually attended Dan's breakout session at Orange Conference 2018, which is all around this stuff. So it was really cool, and I'm really excited about bringing this book review to you today. Now, the thing about preteen ministry is, one thing I've noticed is we're actually losing kids' interests, like preteens' interest between 10 and 12. And I think a lot of that is because we lump them in with the other kids. We sort of do the same old songs, we still do the stories, which is all good stuff, but I think preteens need to be approached in a different way. And this book's going to help us understand just how we do that. So onto the book. So Dan breaks the book up into two main parts. The first part is really about giving us an overview about where preteens are at socially, psychologically, mentally, emotionally, all those fun things. And then part two, Dan talks about, okay, now we know this stuff, how do we set up a strategy in how we can do that really effectively? Part one, the life of a preteen. And chapter one talks about how preteens are in this really icky phase developmentally of being caught between childhood and adolescence. They don't really fit in any. But if we don't minister them in a particular way, they are going to absolutely check out. So we need to make sure that we understand just the developmental stage of preteens. Chapter 2 talks about our preteens being stuck between expectations and reality. So this is expectations of school, of parents, of friends, of siblings, even church ministry leaders. So what we have to understand, and Dan goes into this, is that the church is vying for the attention of our kids. So are we actually engaging them in a way that they're going to have their ears pricked up and think, I better engage in this, or are they actually going to check out? And of course, I've got a counselling background, so I love when Dan talks about how preteens are feeling the pressure already to succeed. So we have to give them the message that it's okay to fail. We have to give them a message that this is a safe place for you. And we'll go into the environment stuff in a sec. So being caught between expectations and reality, I got so much out of that chapter. So make sure you give it a read. And chapter 3, which is the last part of part 1, Dan talks about how our preteens are caught between information and understanding. So when I was a preteen, a little while ago now, the internet was only just starting up, so I didn't have all the information that I could have had. But now preteens have so much information going in and out that they need to understand how to process it, and the church is no different. So how the church can do this is that we have to move from telling kids about just Bible stories, which is still important stuff, but we have to also include this piece of how does it adapt? How does it transfer to their real life? Because young people will be asking those questions. This is great, but what does it mean for me? So being caught between information, they have the Bible information from being younger, but to understanding, okay, what does it mean for me and where do I fit into God's greater story? And here we go, part 2. Dan talks about how do we strategize now? How do we make a plan for our preteen ministry? So part 1 was really important because it sets the scene up. It paints this picture that maybe we need to change how we do things. So part 2 is all about strategy. So here we go. Chapter 4, which is the first part of part 2, Dan talks about creating a unique environment for our preteens. And what this means is give them their own space, give them their place that they can call home, give them a place where they can be safe in their environment and be engaged, but more importantly, ask questions. A way you could do this is by asking preteens, what do you want in your space? Things like, sugar is always a popular one. Flat screen TVs, could be gaming consoles, could be the latest preteen music, whatever they're into. Make sure you create a space that they get excited about, because if you don't create an environment that's conducive to preteens being engaged, they won't care and they will check out. So create a unique environment that's just for them. Chapter 5, which is part 2 of part 2, Dan talks about catch them with consistent volunteers. So I've been part of churches where the children's pastor or whoever gets up at the front and says, whoever wants to be a leader, come on board, would love to have you. But Dan says, no, don't settle for that. Make sure you have people who are passionate, people who are energetic, people who are vibrant. So people who understand that preteens need to be not just told stories, but they need to be communicated to. So make sure you get volunteers who are right. One more thing I love about this book is that Dan gives us pretty much the answers right in front of us. He tells us what a good preteen communicator or leader looks like. So on page 85, he says, great preteen communicators are humorous, so make sure you're funny in a relevant way. People who are dynamic, so people who really want to be there and are passionate. People who are likable and authentic, because let's face it, preteens can pick up people who are fake and phony. So make sure you get all those 4 attributes in a leader, because if you don't, your preteen ministry is going to suffer. And Dan is really big on don't settle just for anyone. Don't settle for someone just because a gap needs to be filled. Make sure you have high standards. That's really crucial. Chapter 6, Dan talks about catching preteens with effective programming. Now, you may have a program or a curriculum that you've always done, but I want to challenge you, as Dan does, to ask yourself, how effective is this program? Are we seeing outcomes for our young people? Maybe you are, and that's great. But again, Dan gives us 4 really clear outlined questions that we can ask to assess and evaluate just where we're at. And here they are. Number 1 is to elevate questions, because preteens are getting to the stage now in their development where they're going to start to doubt. They're going to start to question, maybe what I've learned, maybe it's not true. So make sure you create a safe space where you can ask kids, what do you think? What does this mean for you? So elevate questions, that's so important. The second barometer is to make small groups central. Now, I would argue that small groups is where some of the best discipleship happens. So make sure that these are really part of what you're doing in your preteen ministry. The third barometer is to focus on landing planes. Now, what Dan means by this is try and create a space where kids can leave being equipped, having the tools to say, okay, I learnt that in church or in Sunday school. This is what it's going to mean for me this week. So make sure that your kids are leaving with the idea that their faith looks real outside those 4 walls. Number 4 is to focus on activity-based learning, because let's face it, preteens learn best by doing things. So make sure you don't let that slide. And the last chapter focuses on catching them with intentional parents. Now, it wouldn't be an orange book without the importance around partnering with parents, and there's good reason for that, because parents have by far the most influence. Make sure you connect with your parents throughout the week. Make sure that your parents know that you are there and you're on their side. I love what Cara Powell said recently, and that is, you don't want to have parent info nights just to tell them about programming. You want to make sure that you give them answers about how they can be better parents. So make sure you connect with your parents through the week, really important. In my orange video a little while ago, I pointed this out, so check it out up there and click on it. But the reality is that parents have by far greater influence than we do. So let's try and leverage that and have a partnership with the greatest influencers of all, the parents. The next part of the book, Dan talks about next steps. Now, that's like a good, nearly quarter of the book that he talks about, which is awesome because I love strategy. But basically, the idea is to not try and change the world next Sunday. Don't try and bring everything in straight away, because you're going to freak people out. The best advice that Dan and I probably give as well is to make sure that you bring people along the journey with you. So do things step by step and ask questions. Be inquisitive. Make sure you role model to your leaders what that looks like. In the last part of the book, Dan's got a heap of worksheets, just activities that you can do to help assess, evaluate, and to make your preteen ministry even better. So look, I'll be honest, this book, when I picked it up off the shelf at the Orange Conference, I was pretty excited, but I've read it probably about 10 times now, and I keep finding new things. So make sure you pick it up because you will not regret it. So now for my first rating ever, I give this book 5 oranges out of 5 because it is amazing. It's a page turner, and honestly, it doesn't matter if your church is big or small. Dan has great tips the whole way through that I believe is so universal that they can be applied to any context. So 5 out of 5, Dan, you've done awesome, mate. Good job. So that's the book, Caught in Between. The link is below, so make sure you do pick it up because it's an amazing book. It really will transform how you do ministry. It's honestly one of the best investments I've personally ever made. So guys, that's it for this week. Thanks so much for checking us out. Again, check out the book. You won't be disappointed. We'll see you next week, and God bless, and have a good one. See ya.